Welcome to Growing Pains, a podcast of the Sumner County Republican Freedom Caucus, where we explore the challenges of a thriving Sumner County. Today's guest, former executive director of the Gallatin Economic Development Agency, is James Fenton. Thank you for being here, James.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I haven't seen you in a while, so this is a great excuse to catch up with you. And I know that you have some wisdom to share for this audience. So I really appreciate you making the trek all the way back to Gallatin again.
My pleasure.
You served for more than a decade. How long were you with EDA?
About 12 years. Yeah.
12 years.
Yeah.
12 years. Really recognized statewide for your impact and your results that you had in various roles. And I know I thought this was interesting. I looked at your LinkedIn and I love a couple things I read there. One that says, and I don't think this is totally still, well, you're mostly retired, right?
Got
but always
couple
looking,
of fingers in the pot still working on some projects.
Okay,
Sure.
So creating new opportunities is your header, and I think that's your spirit is one that is not going to just retire and sail off into the, well, maybe you will sail, but not forever. And of your time in Gallatin, I love that it shows you worked for the most business-friendly city in Middle Tennessee. And Gallatin is a really friendly place, but I appreciate that specific call out. And I do know it's true from many that are investors in this region. Gallatin is a very business-friendly community. So
It really is. That's one of the reasons that brought me here in the first place, just because of doing some research, just discovering exactly what the city had done really to prepare for the future. It's so important for a community. A company's not going to invest in a community unless that community is already invested in itself. And it was evident that Gallatin was investing in itself.
Oh, that's awesome. That's exactly where I wanted to start because, I know you spent how many years in Cheatham County? You were director.
6 years
EDA,
before I came here.
And then you had that awesome reverse commute. I remember the one time you set up your GoPro on your dash to show how glorious it is to drive from anywhere else in Nashville to Gallatin on a daily basis. And so you had a great gig. But that I did want to explore that some, because finding yourself here, you must have you did your research and you knew that there was something here to.
Yeah, I knew my predecessor that worked here, and he and I had several conversations. And when he mentioned that he was leaving, that's when I began doing some research, finding out maybe this would be a good move for me. And it clearly proved to be a great move for me. I'm so thankful I had the opportunity to serve here.
All right, well, we'll probably come back to that conversation a little bit more, but let's do a little education for listeners that just might not understand. If they hear economic development, they think of ribbon cuttings and, just celebrations, but talk about the work that the public never sees that really drives those outcomes. That's economic development.
So economic development, we really have three main goals that you need to achieve. First is to learn your community, find out who and what truly makes that city its strengths so that you can sell those. You have to put together a good story to be able to sell the community. And second, you have to have excellent relationships outside of the city. You have to know the site consultants, you have to know the engineering firms, you have to know the brokers, you have to know all the people that might be involved and know when a company is looking to move. So that's important, but it's also really important to have a really good relationship with your existing businesses. That probably should have been number 2 for me, to have a good relationship, to know the people that are here so that you can help them if they have a problem, if they need a stop sign, or if they have water problems, whatever, you need to be able to. And they're also often aware of other companies that might be looking. CEOs sit down and talk. They know what's going on. So if you have a good relationship with those people, then you have a better chance of getting on top of somebody who's here. In fact, one of the companies we recruited from upstate New York, I went up and visited them during that process, and they told me I was the first person from anybody, from their city, from anybody that had ever come to their facility. And they've been there for 70 years. And it's one of the reasons they ended up coming here is because we paid attention to them and cared about them.
That makes a big difference, and relationships really do. I didn't want to cut you off. Were you going to?
No, because we rely on site consultants, but we also have really strong partnerships with Tennessee ECD at the state. They brought a lot of the projects to us, and also TVA. TVA ended up being just an incredibly important partnership that we have. So all of those mixed together, and to have a city like Gallatin that supports the economic development to go make those relationships. I think that's part of why the city was so successful during the tenure I was here.
Got it. You mentioned something, and I just don't want to forget to come back to it. So I want to, something that I didn't realize was part of that economic development equation. It's not only, you mentioned the relationships with the existing business, but the opportunity to develop those existing investments. And that's I don't know if you know offhand the percentages, but an existing business contributes significantly often to that total development and investment.
I think it was something like 70% of all jobs created in a community traditionally come from existing industries. So if you aren't there with them, helping them, encouraging them, making them feel successful, helping them be successful, then they aren't going to expand. And I think a classic example is what just happened here in Gallatin. You've got a new 500,000 square foot facility that's been put up from an existing company that's moved there.
The Simpson Strong Tie example. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's definitely give them a shout out. I love that their leadership saw all the potential that they invested here initially, but it's remarkable. I don't know if I know you haven't been in Gallatin recently, but you probably haven't been over near there.
I have not. I will drive by before I go home.
I think we should go on a little field trip when we finish up.
That might be a good idea.
So, okay, what would you say has really changed in Gallatin over the past decade plus that made it so attractive? And you were saying you saw those things when you were researching your job opportunity to come here in the first place. What were some of those things that really had started to shift? There
was a mentality that stayed intact, that wanted the growth to occur, that wanted those jobs here. And I think that's something that a prospect that's looking and talking can pick up in a heartbeat. And they read the newspapers. If they're thinking of coming here, they read the newspapers. They do their research. And if there's a lot of infighting, if there's a lot of negativity towards what they're trying to accomplish, they won't come. I mean, the process is we would normally, if we don't track down the company ourselves, we get an RFI, which is a request for information, and then we fill this out and send it back. And it's usually the person sitting at the front desk that goes through them all, and if they don't hit the check marks, it goes in the round file cabinet. And so you really don't have a choice. But once you get through the first step or so, and then they start doing their research, and if there is anything that's really not something they can live with, then they're not going to be coming here. And the consistent growth, which I know a lot of people are upset with, but that was part of what made this possible, because we continued to attract the workforce. I mean, when I was here, I had one of the companies pulled Mayor Brown aside and said, "Would you tell Fenton to quit bringing companies here?" Because they were having trouble finding employees. And so the consistent growth that we've experienced has allowed those companies to continue to thrive.
Consistent. And I think that's an important point that you're making, and maybe not driving home, though, that consistency and that stability, there's communities that are experiencing the kind of growth that is just debilitating. Whereas I think what we have here, although it does create true growing pains, as our podcast title acknowledges. Although it creates some of those challenges, it has been a very steady growth, and it has been receptive. And I think you had made the comment that could easily be taken out of context that our leaders wanted growth. What they want is that opportunity, right? And that and the workforce.
Thank you for correcting that.
No, that's
I think they necessarily wanted this much growth, but understood there is no stasis in a community. You're either growing or you're dying.
Yeah.
You can stay where you are for a while, but the cost of fire trucks and police cars and water infrastructure, all that stuff keeps increasing. And so if you don't have growth to keep up with that, to pay for that, then a large burden falls on the people that are there. You can't just close the doors. And what's interesting, I had one person come into my office once, moved from out of state, and said, well, I was able to sell my house for enough. I was able to come here, and this is their words, buy a mansion on 6 acres. And I had enough money left over, so I bought 7 acres around me to keep people from moving in close. So that's someone that just moved here. And that was a close the door behind them kind of thing. And that a community cannot sustain itself with that kind of thought process.
Right. I'm going to go back to the fun because let's talk about, you really have, I know you have a lot of feathers in your cap from your time in your professional career and in Gallatin specifically. Project Skillet. I don't know if that's how you think back to it, but it was my first exposure. So, sitting as a new rookie county commissioner and not really understanding a lot about the world of economic development. And so I really distinctly remember the first time I was exposed to what really became a massive investment in this community. So let's kind of go back and talk about it. What made that project so interesting, so complicated? I mean, you can go in a lot of different directions.
So Project Skillet was 2016 is when we first introduced to
10
that
years
project.
ago.
And it was a company that TVA had brought to us. It was interesting because like at the beginning, I think in August, I had a couple of folks that work in the office go do a presentation to TVA because thinking through it, we thought that would be a good place for a data center. And so they went and presented to TVA and then 3 months later, we were signing an NDA with Project Skillet, which eventually went to Birmingham, Alabama. It disappeared. But then 2 or 3 months later, they were back knocking on the doors. Now, they purchased 800 plus acres. None of it was city-owned. So there was a complicated process to get landowners put together. And amongst that property was a large farm that was in a trust, which had to be amended. And that process took 61 votes. 61 people had to vote on us.
24 of them were county commissioners.
Right. As it turned out, it was going to go to University of Tennessee for agricultural experimentation. And that one word, I think, is really what saved this whole process for us. And I sat down with the president of UT, who was in DiPietro, sat down, had lunch, and he says, we do that all the time. We've even got somebody on staff that sells. And then he wrote back to me in a couple of weeks. It said, sorry, somebody's had their eyes on that for quite a while. So it was, at that point, there was a possibility of the whole thing going sideways. However, through a lot of conversations, as it turned out, Randall Boyd, who was Commissioner of Economic Development for Tennessee, was now president of UT. They had just reduced the size of their board, and one of our elected officials had had the chance to interview all of them before they got selected, and so there were a lot of connections there.
Yeah.
The Board of Trustees eventually did sign off and say that you could, sell it.
Sell that property.
Yeah, sell that property.
So that was step one.
That was step one. So if UT didn't take it, then it was to go, I think it was to the county. Yes, to the county.
So. Yep.
For agricultural experimentation, which meant investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment and people and all that kind of stuff. If it had just been pure agriculture, they could have leased the land out and had a revenue stream. But because it was for experimentation, it would have taken a lot of investment for the county to actually do that with it. And so that's when I was in front of you folks. And
one at a time. I'm sure. Well, at least I know I had to.
Spoke to a lot of folks, and there was a little different genetic makeup then than there is now, which allowed it to move forward. I think we got 14 votes. We only needed 13 to make it, and there were a couple of abstentions, that kind of stuff. So, but overall, they did say that. And then there was a third party involved, and it was to go to the church, again, for agricultural experimentation. And there had been things occurring that I wasn't aware of with that trust over the years. They were not necessarily, when I first walked in there, in a receptive mood, but again, through the conversation, through talking through what it meant for the community and some remuneration for them, then we finally got all parties to sign off. And the actual thing that almost took it down less than 3 weeks before we announced is, I don't know if you know, but our utility laws in this state are very, very unique, and every utility has their little fiefdom. And the property they wanted to put the building on was in another utility district. And that utility district used less water per day, the entire district,
Wow.
than Meadow was going to need possibly in one day. And so they were unable, but we supply them. So through a lot of conversation and actually a board meeting where our state senator was there, the commissioner of economic development was there, the mayors were there. I mean, it was and they finally agreed to it. So but that was like 3 weeks before the announcement.
I did not
very
recall
close,
that for sure,
very close to not happening, but finally worked everything out. And in all honesty, with the way there is a lot of pressure and pushback against large data centers in the United States right now, because they're popping up everywhere and consuming such a great amount of power and water and those kind of things. Again, 10 years ago, it was a great idea. And it turned out to be a real big positive thing for this community. The largest revenue stream in the county, and they've been very generous to the community. And so I think it's very good. Got in before the big push, the big rush.
Well, you're right, because what Meta was talking about was long before. I mean, like you said, back in 2016 and through 2019, when it was finally fully approved, we weren't talking about AI and the amount of data and processing that is now on the horizon. So it is. It's a very different situation.
Just had good timing.
It was an enormous investment, and it's become even bigger. And I have a hard time. I'm really good at math, but I have a hard time remembering numbers, the specifics. So in this case with Meta, their investment has maybe not exponentially increased, but it has increased significantly from the original plan in 2019. Why do you think that investment continued to flourish in that relationship? Because as you said, they are a great community partner. They are looking for every opportunity to invest back in this community and the people that are here. But so what do you think, has allowed it to continue to be such a success?
I think it's the city's forward thinking and planning. We had excess capacity in the water system, and they invested millions of dollars. They probably invested $17 million in our community. We didn't give them, anything. We didn't put anything in for them. They paid for everything and upgraded our water system. They put in roads for us, things like that. So it was the fact that the city, again, had their own utilities and were forward thinking. I think it was just fortunate. We had a power plant right down the road.
Right.
There was a 161 kV line running right through the middle of the property they were purchasing. So there was a lot of, things like that.
What's a 161 kV line?
That's a big electric cord.
Okay.
A lot of electricity running through the middle
Right.
of that facility out there. And again, the neighbors, that came together and did sell them some land. That was something. And when they started building, they spent, I think, 6 months blasting twice a day to create a big level spot out for them. They had a vision of all 5 or 6 buildings, but they were putting all that in to begin with, but then just could only commit to the 2 buildings that they did. But they have again continued just because Gallatin's a great place.
I remember that time period, and there was a lot of communication. And you mentioned early in this conversation just the importance of relationships and the importance of bringing the right people to the table. And even when residents, are going to experience some discomfort, helping navigate through those challenging situations and knowing that the end game, creates an opportunity. It's not something that is, it happens overnight, and it definitely doesn't happen without a lot of thought and forethought about how to make these situations really a win-win for everyone involved.
And the companies involved in putting up the facility and doing the blasting were extremely responsive. I got all the phone calls because complaining, and so they did a spectacular job of putting monitors all around, went to people's houses. If there was a complaint, there was a crack, whatever, they showed up, they fixed it, they didn't argue about it. I mean, there was just, and that was one of the conversations we had beforehand because we knew this was going to be a long, invasive process. And so we just made sure that there were steps in place to make sure we addressed concerns that were out there.
I think that's one of the things that I hope to accomplish through this podcast is an ever-present acknowledgement of the fact that there are consequences and there is inconvenience that comes along the way towards the opportunity that we are really searching for. So when you've got strong leaders who are thinking of the future of this community and how you continue to create opportunity for our families, for our children, for their families, and create a place that people love to be and call home. Having that vision for the future, it doesn't come without those inconveniences. And I think it does all of us a little good just to stop and acknowledge that and be mindful because we can't get to the end game without that.
Right. And again, complaining about growth that was there and apartment buildings that were consumed. Just make it very clear: the city never pursued nor incentivized multifamily. They came on their own.
Right.
But also along with that came 20 some odd new restaurants that people enjoy and take advantage of nowadays that they wouldn't have if that concentration of population hadn't started to arise.
Let's talk about that. I don't think I've been able to capture that in any of our prior conversations. There's certain thresholds that as a especially these bigger franchises, right, or chains, people might be looking forward to some different restaurants that they hope come someday, but they're not until we reach a certain threshold. What are some of those factors?
Well, and it depends on what. If you're looking at fast food, that's one thing. If you're looking at a nice restaurant, I had requests constantly for a very nice restaurant, but you look at the checklist they have to have 50,000 people within a 3-mile radius. Well,
within a 3.
You can't do that here in Gallatin without everybody moving, into the same place. So, I mean, there are thresholds like that, and I think we've gotten to it. It was that 50,000 mark that really started to really set things off. But as we started getting closer to it, and we had shown a consistent growth pattern, again, getting back to that consistency, there weren't spikes. It was just a steady curve, and it was leaning quickly towards that 50,000 mark. Realize when I got here, started in July of 2012, the city was 33,400.
Wow.
And now it's 52,000.
I think I just saw something that's north of 53.
Okay.
So,
yeah. 20,000 people in 13 years, 14 years. That's, but again, it's been steady. It's been consistent.
Steady.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit now.
Okay.
We'll talk about the future of investment and the opportunities that, still are on the threshold for Sumner County. If you were to give leaders kind of a playbook, what are some of the non-negotiables that a community needs to make available and make part of the conversation to enable smart investment?
I think first, as a whole, the community needs to decide what direction that they want to go. There has to be a fairly common thought process occurring so that everybody understands that's not, and that doesn't mean everybody has to agree 100%, because some people are going to want to go over there and some people are going to want to go over there. But there has to be a general idea that the entire community is moving towards. I think second is the importance of the infrastructure, of the utilities.
Right.
That has to be there, obviously, or just won't function at all. There's no place for people to go. I think the permitting process can be, difficult. We were very fortunate here in Gallatin. I mean, from the top to the bottom, every department, everybody that works in those departments knew what they were doing. And that was one of the things that I was able to do, is to walk these prospects through this process, and they could sit down and understand, yes, here it is. It's all written out. This is what you need to do. And I think making that crystal clear and as easy as possible,
right,
without undue onus on companies. And some of that comes from the federal level. Some of that comes from the state level. It's just, but making that process smooth is also good. And again, the conversation has to be positive. That's an important aspect to that. Like I mentioned earlier, they do their research. And I would get emails. Well, what did this person say? Did they mean that? Is that really going to happen? And I'd have to walk through the process and find out if it was really going to happen, or if that was just somebody making a grandstand or something.
That's an important, There's been talk about, all our public meetings, and so there's a lot of ways for residents and those future investors we're talking about right now, right? To keep tabs on the tone and in the environment, the culture of a community. So
putting them on TV makes it accessible
Right.
to everybody.
It does.
And you would be surprised how many people, that one person, the last person on that list that nobody recognizes, who they're with.
Well, you mentioned making some of these processes as smooth as possible, and in many cases, having somebody like you able to kind of handhold people or businesses through that process is important. But talk a little bit about just the importance of things moving through a process on time. There's investments that are made on the front end that really depend on a thoughtful and expeditious decision-making process. And so sometimes you do see maybe grandstanding or, other behaviors that happen in these approval processes that don't really understand what's at stake and don't understand can you just talk a little bit about, like, have you seen some examples even or something that you can refer to?
Mentioned at the beginning that a lot of people think economic development is just ribbon cutting and groundbreaking.
Yeah.
By the time you get to that, 90% of the work's done. All they have to do is build the building.
Yeah.
And it does take all that. And when a company invests large amounts, hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes tens of millions of dollars, they put out, they put out a Gantt chart as far as how construction, when they're going to be up, they're betting on coming online at this time so they can start making money again or making more money and paying for this. So anything in the middle of that process that throws a real hiccup into it, that impacts the bottom line of a company directly. Because if you have to delay it for a month because of whatever, somebody got upset that they were doing such and such and they got to stop, cease and desist until we figure that out, that has a tremendous impact on a community. And just like during this ice storm, when some of these small places had to shut down for a week, that some are going to have a difficult time recovering just because that wasn't in their pro forma, so to speak.
That's major implications. And it is. Yeah. It's hard to quantify that here as a theoretical. But I do know that I've seen tens, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars of just throwaway. When you put a plan together that gets stuck needlessly or, just without a genuine interest in resolving that question and just not respecting the opportunity that's at hand and the investment that's being made in bringing that opportunity forward. It's just hard for most people to wrap their head around. All right, let's try this. I've never done this on one of my podcasts, but I thought you have, like, I said it in the beginning, an intense amount of knowledge and wisdom in that brain. So I'm going to try a rapid fire round with you. Okay. Let's see if we can do this.
Okay.
So no sentences, just, or maybe one sentence each, no big speeches on any of these. The most underrated ingredient in landing major projects is?
Personal relationships.
The biggest deal killer communities create for themselves?
Public discord.
The best reason to say no to a big project?
Wages.
Excellent. Best reason to say yes?
Fits into the plan.
The difference between growth and smart growth?
That's going to take
you
more
can
than a
You
sentence.
can have more than a sentence on that.
On that one. Smart growth truly means elected officials understand that it's coming and are making plans for that so they don't get swallowed up and get behind. Because once you get behind, it's really, really difficult to get back ahead. Some of the things that they've done here in Gallatin, like synchronize all the stoplights throughout the town so it makes traffic flow better. Things like that where they're able to get out ahead. It helps alleviate some of those growing pains.
Yeah. Thank you for throwing that title right back in there. All right. So we'll wrap it up with this. What's your advice to the next generation of leaders who want to do big things, but don't want to break their community in the process? And I bet you've touched on a lot of this already, but
I think one of the things that the Gallatin's actually doing right now is thinking about growing up instead of growing out. They're looking at redoing the downtown, redoing City Hall, putting up, a large development downtown. And I think that kind of forward thinking is going to help, like, the downtown area thrive. And when a downtown area thrives, the rest of the community thrives. So I like what Gallatin's looking at right now.
Yeah. Well, and looking at it doesn't mean we're committed.
No.
But I appreciate the due process, and I think you that'll definitely be a topic for another future podcast episode. So thank you for teeing that up for next time. Thanks for
pleasure.
coming up to visit with us. I really appreciate you.
Anytime. I appreciate the invite.
Thanks. Until next time.